You know, in a movie filled with ice puns, how is there a cameo by Coolio that has nothing to do with Mr. Freeze? On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Batman and Robin. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today in the co-host chair, it's her birthday week. It's my lovely wife, Bethany. How are you, Bethany?
I'm cold. That's about the level of puns that were in this movie.
Yeah. So, we're doing Batman and Robin. As always, I allow. I sound like I've
like you have any say in this.
Yeah. As always, my wife and my children get to have an episode around as close to their birthday as I can get them. And this was Bethany's birthday episode, and she wanted to do Batman and Robin.
I chose this.
Yes. So let's tell everybody why. Why did you choose Batman and Robin?
So this movie, what year did it come out?
1997.
Okay. So this was like prime Bethany age. I was very close to Ruby's age now, and this movie came out, and I don't know, I just loved it. I loved the costumes. I loved the camp. I had a poster of it on my closet door. And I don't know. I enjoyed the movie when I was a kid. And I was just like, this movie gets a bad rap. Let's take another look at it and see how I feel now. and give it some due justice.
Okay, we'll see if you can make that happen. Of course, this movie did appear in our worst movies bracket a few months ago. So you can go back and listen to that. But yes, as we stated, this movie was released June 20th of 1997. This, of course, is the fourth Batman movie from that run, if you will, the continuation of what started with the great Batman 98, Tim Burton's masterpiece, with Michael Keaton, who then continued
1988.
1989. Sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, 1989's Batman. And then we got Batman Returns, which did probably get a little darker than it needed to. And the younger kids were probably a little scared by Batman Returns.
I did not watch that as a child.
So then you get Batman Forever, which we have discussed on the show before with Val Kilmer, and we introduced Robin. And it's a little bit lighter, but kind of holds a little bit of its edginess. And then we get this.
I will say, I do think I saw Batman. What was the third one?
Batman Forever.
Batman Forever. I'm pretty sure I saw that one. Because I have like a clear memory of Robin like mopping the floor with his gymnastics.
Yeah. And then he does laundry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was a continuation of the Joel Schumacher Batman movies. Joel Schumacher had come in to replace Tim Burton in the third movie, and now here he was here. I will give Schumacher his credit. Schumacher is a Batman fan. Yeah. He has stated he is a Batman fan. I actually found a quote from him from an interview he had where he said, "One of the things our team brought to the movie was the humor and action of the original comic book. I wanted to emphasize those areas." Knowing that gives it a little bit more credence, because you're looking at Schumacher was a kid in the 60s.
Yeah.
So he had the Adam West TV show.
And but this feels like that.
But he also had this time in the comics where things were a lot brighter, where Batman did have kind of the gray and blue suit. This is before Frank Miller came in the 80s and made Batman dark again. But of course, Batman being brought to the movies is all because of Michael Uslan, another huge Batman fan. And he actually said this in a quote that I found: "The 1960s Batman, pow, zap, and wham. Fortunately or unfortunately, fortunately for those who only know the 60s TV show, and unfortunately for you and me, Batman and Robin was the Batman of the mid-60s. So here is the director and the producer essentially saying the same thing, but in two completely different ways. Schumacher expressing his love for the 60s Batman, and Michael Uslan, who, again, he brought Batman to the big screen, trying to get away from the way Batman had been portrayed before. But Schumacher has, and he does actually in a special feature on the Batman and Robin Blu-ray, he does apologize for this film.
Okay, so I feel like if you try to compare this movie to pretty much any other superhero comic book, even Batman movie, it's not going to hold up. However, if you look at it, take it for what it is, the campiness, I don't think it's as awful. It's not great. I'm not saying it's great, but I don't think it's as awful as it gets the reputation of being.
Well, we'll definitely talk that out, and we'll see if you can sway me or anyone else listening who thinks otherwise. But let's go ahead and jump into the characters, because I'm going to be honest, the quicker I can get this episode over with, the better. Especially after the fact that this is a 2 hour and 5 minute movie.
It's so long. I don't remember it being this long.
It does not need to be a 2 hour and 5 minute movie.
You could shave 30 minutes off this movie and it would be the same movie it is right now.
If
you cut out half of Arnold Schwarzenegger's puns, you would get a solid hour and a half.
Yeah. All right, well, let's get into the characters. We'll start off, of course, with Bruce Wayne, Batman himself. This time played by George Clooney. Val Kilmer and Shoemaker had clashed on the set of Forever, and so Kilmer wasn't real big on working with Shoemaker again. But he had already signed to do The Saint, another movie he did around this time. And instead of doing Batman and Robin, he had the opportunity to do Island of Dr. Moreau with Marlon Brando.
Oh.
And so he chose that movie over this movie. I can't say the Island of Dr. Moreau is necessarily a great movie, but it was probably still a better choice.
I love George Clooney.
So George Clooney's a good Bruce Wayne.
Okay.
I'll give him that.
I think he was very bored in this movie. I got a feeling of boredom from a lot of the actors in this movie. I feel like maybe Uma Thurman and Arnold Schwarzenegger were doing their own thing, and everybody else was just kind of obligated to be there.
I think George Clooney, because this was as George Clooney is starting his movie career.
Yeah.
He had done From Dusk Till Dawn, which is where they kind of decided he was right for
movies.
For Batman.
Yeah.
Is From Dusk Till Dawn. No, Schumacher, though, actually wanted David Duchovny.
Huh.
Writing off of his X-Files fame.
Okay.
So I don't know if he was ever offered the role. I just know that Shoemaker was interested in David Duchovny. Of course, George Clooney was huge on ER at the time. He had done From Dusk Till Dawn. That was pretty much his big movie at the time. I honestly think, though, if you waited a few years and you had the "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" George Clooney in this movie, where he knew what type of movie he was making.
Yeah.
You know, the one who would later go on to make like Leatherheads, you know, those type of movies where he knew what type of movie he was making. I think he could have brought a little bit more, kind of like Adam West did.
Yeah. He took it very seriously, and in a movie where it's so high camp, it just didn't read as interesting at all.
Speaking of not interesting, let's talk about Dick Grayson, Robin, the returning Chris O'Donnell from the previous movie. I will say, so the Robin suit, I don't know if you're aware of this, the Robin suit is actually the Nightwing suit.
Oh,
they just make it red instead of blue. It was the way the suit looked like in the 90s in the comic.
Okay, that makes sense.
The Nightwing. So
since he's 30 years old.
Yeah. He was actually 33, 30.
I was joking.
Let's see. How old was he? It was 97. Yeah, he was 20. No, he was 27. So he was close to 30. Yeah. Because he was born in 19. Because he and Uma Thurman are the same age.
Okay.
Chris O'Donnell and Uma Thurman are the same age. Because they were both born in 1970. So, yeah, there you go.
Good for them.
But I have nothing else to say about Chris O'Donnell. I dislike him in every way, shape, or form. I have said that before. As Robin. Let me say as Robin.
What personal beef do you have with Chris O'Donnell?
No, I like Chris O'Donnell in like Sin of a Woman. And
what was that movie where he was like the Bachelor guy?
It was called The Bachelor.
The Bachelor, yeah.
So yeah, I'm not saying anything,
that,
but
5 years when Hollywood was ramming him down our throats, and we're just like, we're good.
Don't like him as Robin,
good.
Especially in this movie because he is whiny throughout the entire movie.
He acts like a 12-year-old, and it doesn't read well when he's clearly close to 30 years old, and he's so annoying.
Yeah. And then we are introduced to Barbara Wilson. Batgirl, played by Alicia Silverstone, 2 years following the success of Clueless.
Right.
Now, this is a amalgamation of characters from the comic. So, of course, the name is clearly a reference to Barbara Gordon.
Right.
And that's because more people would recognize the name Barbara as being a Batgirl.
Ruby did.
Yeah. Alfred does have a niece in the comics, but her name is Daphne. She appeared in Batman 216 in November of 1969, but she is actually the daughter of Alfred's brother, Wilfred.
The one that they're looking for.
The one that he's looking for, versus his sister, which, to my knowledge, has never existed in the comics.
Yeah. And the fact that, let's just say it, Alfred's kind of ancient in this movie, and then the picture of his sister looks like an old movie star. So, how old was she when she had Alicia Silverstone?
Yeah, I don't know how that's all supposed to play out.
It was interesting.
Well, also the fact that Barbara is coming from England. No accent.
Clearly still has that Valley Girl, California accent. Yeah. I think my biggest issue was how they introduced her. Was there was no reason for her to stand on that little stool.
Well, she was looking for a key.
She was looking through the window.
She was looking for a key on the top ledge.
But she was also trying to look through that window, and it was just so that when Chris O'Donnell opened the door, you could do the pan up of her body in a schoolgirl uniform.
Which what
is the point of that for? What college requires a schoolgirl uniform?
But
that?
not just the uniform. As is, what student
is still
wearing their school uniform when they're
flying
when they're going on a trip?
It was literally just to sexualize her right out of the gate, which is weird because they don't do a ton of sexualization of her throughout the movie.
No.
So it's odd that is how they decide to introduce her.
And, we're not going to get into this too much, but I will say that it probably plays a factor in the fact that Joel Schumacher is a homosexual. So you've got Batman and Robin with their nipples, and
thank God Barbara didn't have any nipples on her suit.
Barbara doesn't.
Yeah. I don't know. A lot of movies during that time kind of played it up. We're going to get into Poison Ivy eventually, but her whole character is just a sexualization. And so then to introduce this character who's clearly supposed to be super young, and then Chris O'Donnell is a middle-aged man with a mortgage, and he's just ogling her. It just, I don't know. Yeah. It was a creepy way to set up her character, especially since they don't do anything with it throughout the rest of the story, which I'm kind of glad. I just wish they didn't start off on that note. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But going back to Alfred's niece in the comics, Daphne, it is in that comic that she actually attempts to steal a original manuscript of Romeo and Juliet from Bruce, and Alfred catches her. And I kind of think that they use that idea of she's not what she appears as her thing with the motorcycle races and making money off the motorcycles and all that she does. But the other, I guess, version of her that would happen here would be that of Kate Kane, or Betty Kane. I forgot which one is. One's Batwoman, the other's Batgirl. But the only real connection there is the blonde hair, and it's sticking out because she only wears the eye mask. They do the Barbara Gordon full cowl at one point in the movie when she rides the motorcycle. She does get the full cowl, but anyway, like I said, she's an amalgamation, so kind of made up for the movie, but kind of also from the comics. But moving on to Dr. Victor Freeze.
I love that he was born with that name, and then he just so happened to get freeze powers.
That's Batman villains for you, because you got the Riddler, who is Edward Enigma, and he becomes the Riddler. So there's a lot of that in Batman comics. So especially the characters that were kind of created in the late 50s and 60s, just that campiness with that.
Right.
But of course, and I also love how he is Dr. Victor Freeze, but when he becomes a villain, he's just Mr. Freeze. Let's just throw the doctor out the...
He doesn't want to mix his personal and his professional. His professional life is as Dr. Freeze, but when he is villainizing all of Gotham and trying to freeze them, that's just for fun.
Yeah.
He's just Mr. Freeze.
I will say this version of Mr. Freeze is probably more inspired by Paul Dini's take on the character from the Batman animated series than it is from the comic, although the comic would later adapt kind of the same background. But here he is, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Who gets top billing.
Bethany pointed out, he was a bigger star. I mean, this is the late 90s. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a huge star.
He had done all of the stuff. He'd been Terminator. He'd been Kindergarten Cop. He'd been Terminator 2. He'd done all of it. Like, he was high up there on everybody. And George Clooney just wasn't.
No. Again, George Clooney had done, Return of the Killer Tomatoes. He had done Facts of Life, but he was big on ER.
Right.
But yeah, he gets top billing. I will point this out though. At one point, and I'm sure it was a much different movie, probably more in tune with Otto Preminger's version of Mr. Freeze from the 60s television show. But at one point, Mr. Freeze was going to be played by Anthony Hopkins.
Oh, that would have been a scary Mr. Freeze.
Yeah. It definitely could have been more interesting.
You wouldn't have had the incredible lines from Arnold Schwarzenegger if you had Anthony Hopkins. Like, Anthony Hopkins is going to give you, like, scary... Like, he's going to freeze you with his words and then with the freeze gun. Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to give you...
Yeah, in the video there. Which I love that in order to explain why Mr. Freeze is such a bulky guy.
He's a two-time
Olympic decathlon. Yeah. He's a Nobel Prize winning molecular biologist and two-time Olympic decathlete.
When do you have the time, sir? Oh, he freezes time.
Yeah, just throwing that in. This is the first time we've really talked about Mr. Freeze in depth, so I do want to point out his first appearance in the comics was in February of 1959 in Batman 121, although he was called Mr. Zero in that issue. But same character who was later introduced by the name Mr. Freeze, although they do connect it. Batman in this comic, this was in Detective Comics 373 in March of 1968. Batman actually does say to Robin, he says, remember Zero, who we faced? Well, now he's going by Freeze. So they do have that. Although this was not Mr. Freeze's first appearance. Mr. Freeze's first appearance was in the television show.
Oh.
Because the difference between Mr. Zero and then later becoming Mr. Freeze is Mr. Zero was just a guy in like this crazy suit. Like, he just looked like a regular guy. He was in this, I think it was like an orange type, almost like an astronaut looking suit. Okay. And he had the freeze gun. And then when he is introduced in the television show, they decide to give him where he can only live in freezing temperatures. Mm-hmm. And they give him the blue skin. And that's like I said, the Otto Preminger's version of him from the television show. And then they brought him back into the comics in the late 60s. And what's funny is when Batman tells Robin, this is Mr. Zero, he's going by the name Mr. Freeze, Robin actually says in the comic that the name sounds like a campy name dreamed up for a villain in a television program. So they actually reference that that's where it came from.
Accurate. Good call there, Robin.
Yeah. Our other villain here is also a doctor, Dr. Pamela Isley, who becomes Poison Ivy. So again, there's that P.I., Pamela Isley, Poison Ivy.
Which I was surprised. We were watching this. Our kids fell asleep because this is a 2-hour movie. But Lily even knew as she was starting, she goes, Poison Ivy's real name is Pamela. It's just like, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but they also know her from DC Superhero Girls, so they look at her as a good guy, kind of.
Yes, they thought she was going to be a good guy, and I was like, no.
Yeah. But here she's played by Uma Thurman, who was right at the turning point of her career, kind of becoming more mainstream. She had done some independent work.
She'd done The Truth About Cats and Dogs.
Yeah, that's what I said. She does like some independent work, but this is where she's starting to get into more mainstream.
Yeah.
Although I did find, as I always find it interesting, both Demi Moore and Sharon Stone were considered for Poison Ivy.
I find that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Part of me wonders if Sharon Stone had played Poison Ivy, would she have returned as the villain in Catwoman years later? So, maybe not. But Poison Ivy, this was again her first big screen appearance. She first appeared in the comics in Batman 181 in June of 1966. So again, another one of those 60s villains. Yeah.
She feels like a 60s villain.
Well, especially the way Uma Thurman talks.
And walks.
Yeah. But in that comic, Poison Ivy claims to be public enemy number 1. There's these 3 other female villains. It's like Killer Bee and Spider Queen or something. I forgot what their names are.
Interesting.
And so Ivy shows up at this pop art show in order to prove that she is the bigger villain. So kind of similar situation they do in the movie. So there's a connection there where she shows up at this thing where they are bidding on women.
Gotta love it. Gotta love women being purchased.
And of course, just like in the comic, Batman becomes infatuated with Poison Ivy. Well, it's more Batman in the comic, whereas the movie, it's more Robin.
Yeah, they've got to give Robin one more thing to complain about in this movie.
Yeah, Robin's actually the one who snaps Batman out of his little haze.
Does he slap him?
No. Get
it together, Batman!
But the Poison Ivy origin would more be developed by Neil Gaiman, actually.
Oh, that's cool.
Who would kind of develop an origin for her in Secret Origins number 36 in 1988. In that, she is working for Jason Woodrue, just like she is in here. She's also working with Alec Holland, who many will go, hey, I know that name, because he would later become Swamp Thing.
Oh.
Of course, Jason Woodrue would later become the Floronic Man. I've always had a hard time pronouncing that name. Which
fluoride?
Which you saw in the DC Universe, CW, HBO Max, whatever you want to call it, Swamp Thing TV show. He was kind of the twist in the finale that was supposed to set up season 2 and then didn't happen. But in Neil Gaiman's origin, it's actually Woodrue. So let me see if I can explain this in a brief way. Pamela is infatuated with Woodrue. Like she thinks he's amazing, has this crush on him. Yeah, which of course the way that's portrayed in the movie would probably never be the case. But he uses that to his advantage and he starts like essentially experimenting on her. Like injecting her with certain things and whatnot. And it's eventually his experiments that drive her mad and turn her into Poison Ivy. So again, kind of what they do in this movie.
Yeah.
Is kind of use that aspect of the origin of Poison Ivy there.
So one of the things I find kind of interesting, the fact that she was developed in 1966 and especially her like motivations and her drives in this movie. I don't know how she is in the comics. if it's a similar motivations. But the fact that during that time there was a lot of like move to naturalistic things and being more of the earth, and the fact that it is a villain whose main like motivation is to empower the earth and overrun war and people with plants. I just find that kind of an interesting juxtaposition.
I'm sure there's a connection.
Right.
Yeah, I'm definitely sure there's a connection.
Because, you know, she's got, as, you know, Bruce Wayne even says, she has good motives. They're just too extreme.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting, I'm curious to see like what inspired the idea of Poison Ivy.
Which I will say, these are two, probably, I mean, maybe Catwoman in Batman Returns, but these are probably the first two villains they've introduced in the Batman movies in which they are what I think they are true villains. Like, they have a motivation that is essentially a positive thing, but they go about it in a villainous way.
In an extremist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But of course, she was also introduced in the 60s when there was a big push for more diversity in the comics.
So a female character.
More female characters, because Batgirl, again, same thing. And, you know, a lot of others. All right, let's move on to Bane, played by Jeep Swenson. I'm sure Jeep is not his actual Christian name, but I kept hearing he was a professional wrestler. And I'm a huge wrestling fan, but I could not find where he was ever a mainstream professional wrestler.
Right.
So I don't know if he ever... I did see where he was the final solution in WCW, but that was kind of a one-and-done character there. The only thing else I found that I was like, oh, that would be something else I know him from. He is the masked version of Dorian in The Mask.
Oh, the bad guy.
Yeah. So when he puts on the mask and kind of becomes bigger, that's Jeep Swenson as well. So it could have just been a body double, because there's still a lot of acting that goes on in that. And it's clearly still the actor that's doing it. So I don't know. I will say this, though. This is nothing against Jeep, but this is a horrible version of Bane.
Okay. So tell me about the real Bane, because my experience with Bane is this and that Batman movie.
With Tom Hardy. That is a closer version of Bane.
Okay.
So
like an actually intelligent person.
In the comics, Bane is highly intelligent, speaks like 7 languages. He is not a henchman or a lackey to another villain. He is the main villain. You know, he leads a group. He's the one in charge. It's one of the reasons why he's not only able to outsmart, but outpower Batman.
He's able to outsmart, outwit, and outlast.
Yeah, he's the survivor. Yeah. But yeah, the Nightfall storyline that introduced him with Batman. This is a completely different Bane. They just make him a monster. Yeah,
just like a human weapon, really.
Yeah, they give him some background of that he was a killer named like Antonio Diego or something. And then they
juice him up, and then he's
which the whole Venom thing, the whole juiced up thing, that is true. That's from the comics and all, but yeah, that's just a bad one. The only other people I want to talk about are the only other people that have appeared in all 4 of these Batman movies, and that's Alfred Pennyworth, played by Michael Gough, and Commissioner Gordon, played by Pat Hinkle.
Well, I think the guy who plays Alfred looks as you would imagine Alfred to look. Like,
I do think these movies,
big part of it is the like Batman Beyond, or that was the cartoon, right?
Well, that was another cartoon, but Batman the Animated Series.
Batman the Animated Series, he looks exactly like him in my head.
Yeah, Batman the Animated Series, he was bald, had like the horseshoe hair, but had a little pencil mustache.
Just old white man.
Yeah. No, but I will say, Michael Gough really gave kind of that impression of this is what Alfred should look like. We're not going to give a whole history lesson of Alfred, but Alfred has changed his looks throughout the comic. He started off as like this pudgy, guy, and eventually became more of like Bethany saying the older, more distinguished and refined butler.
Right.
Yeah.
I will say though about Commissioner Gordon, just the few things that I have seen since of Commissioner Gordon, I did not care for this interpretation of Commissioner Gordon. He's just kind of a prop piece. Like he's almost fan service just to like put the name out there so that people who know the comics go like, hey, it's Commissioner Gordon. Whereas things that I have seen actually make him an interesting character. He's almost a partner to Batman.
Yeah, I think Gary Oldman probably defined the character better when when the Batman series was rebooted in the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy.
But I mean, even in DC Superhero Girls, which I know we keep referencing and maybe one day we should talk about it, but it's just, he does have a more significant role. He is an actual person as opposed to just like a comedic officer. Yeah.
All right. So I will always ask, as I do, who do you want to see again and who do you wish would chill?
So, the person I wish would just chill is definitely Robin.
Absolutely.
He's so just whiny and complains the whole time. He's complaining about, like, he does a bad job. He gets frozen in the first 5 minutes of the movie. And then Mr. Freeze gets away. And then he still wants to yell at Batman about how he's not
treated fairly.
Exactly. And I'm just like, okay, but clearly you have things that you're not.
I will say, though, the fact that Batman turns his bike
his engine off
while he's in the process of riding 100 miles an hour down an incline.
Super unsafe, Bruce.
And just luckily stops right before he would go off the edge.
Right. Yeah. So that. And then the person I would like more of is honestly Barbara Wilson, Batgirl. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed her character. I would have liked to get more information on why she started riding motorcycles. And, I think they like tiny dropped the hints that she was actually a computer genius. And
they said that's what she was going to school for.
Yeah.
And then, of course, she helps out at the end by reprogramming the satellite.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then I liked her character. I liked that she was interesting. She had a backstory. She had motivations that I found compelling and had merit. And I would have liked to have seen her character fleshed out a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you on those. There was supposed to be a fifth movie, and this movie being the bomb that it was. It had a great opening weekend. And then after word of mouth got out of how bad it was, it just tanked.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Well, it's a 2-hour long American Express commercial. And that
which is only because of the line he says. There's no logo on the Bat credit card.
Right.
But, yeah.
What seems to be the problem, pal?
There's just so much pain in the world. So many issues. I don't think I can bear it.
Hell, friendo, it sounds like you could use a dose of pop culture roulette.
Pop culture roulette? What's that? Some sort of pop culture themed podcast or something?
That's right, sonny boy. When hope seems far, dive into some PCR.
But I already get my entertainment news from Variety.
Huh, that's pretty good. If you're a chucklehead, PCR gives you news you need, condensed, unfiltered, and raw, from 3 nerds who know a little something about something.
Wow, okay, sign me up.
That's the spirit. Pop Culture Roulette. New episodes every Monday, available on all major podcast directories.
All right, so let's get into the moving panels. There's a lot of campiness here, but you know what? I dug and I found some actual connections to the comics.
And I'm just going to throw it out there. I don't necessarily think campy makes a movie a bad movie.
Oh, no. I agree with that. I mean, if you want to go to, this was really a problem between the filmmakers and the studio.
Right.
And it was, yeah. But no, you can make campy and you can make it good. Or you can make campy and you can make it entertaining.
Right.
Not necessarily good, but entertaining. I mean, John Waters pretty much.
Yeah, that is his whole career.
Yeah. And then, like I said, George Clooney appeared in Return of the Killer Tomatoes.
Well, my thing about George Clooney is I just don't think he realized he was in a campy movie.
No, that's what I'm saying. If this was the George Clooney who appeared in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou or Leatherheads and those type of movies that he would do later, I think we'd have a more fun.
Yeah. Do you know who did know they were in a campy movie? That's Uma Thurman. That woman read that script and she said, oh, this is camp. I got you.
I kind of think Arnold did too, though.
Arnold knew, but he's just not as good of an actor. There, I said it. Yeah. But Uma Thurman, she showed up and she was like, oh, we're doing camp? I got you. And she turned it to 100. And just because of that and the juxtaposition of everything, it almost seemed like too much. But I don't think it would have worked at all if she hadn't been as campy as she was.
Yeah. And again, like I said, they're basing this off of comics from the 60s, the television show from the 60s, and even a lot of the connections I found came from comics of that era into the 80s, I will say. But they'll start off with Mr. Freeze and some of the stuff we see Mr. Freeze do. It starts off with that first appearance in Batman 121 with Mr. Zero. What is Mr. Zero doing in that issue? He is stealing diamonds, which he refers to as ice. So it's that same connection there. He also escapes from Batman by using his freeze gun to make like an ice chute. That he slides down. In that comic, he has a frozen hideout.
Yeah.
Where he is wearing like a smoking jacket.
Just like he did in this movie.
Yeah, although he also had the big fuzzy polar bear slippers in this movie.
Why would he need that? He wants to be cold. You put on fuzzy slippers like that to warm up.
Yeah. And then as you mentioned, the random cameo by Vivica A. Fox who's
practically nude.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense as to why. Literally everyone else. Yeah. Literally everyone else is in parkas and it's just to sexualize her, and then you never see her again.
And their food trays are stuck to their mouths. And she's there for the cameo, and that's all. But I thought this was interesting. Mr. Zero's henchmen are actually sitting on a heated bench.
Oh, that's really nice
inside of this hideout. So
he's so thoughtful.
I mean, I'm sure there's some issues sitting there going, how are they sitting on something that is producing heat like this, especially the way it looks. If you look at it in the comic book, it looks like they should be catching on fire. But again, so we've got the connection there.
Maybe with as cold as the air is, it evens things out.
Maybe.
I don't know. I'm not a scientist. Ask Dr. Freeze.
And then you mentioned the opening scene. Well, in October of 1975 in Batman 268, Batman and Robin actually fight their enemies on an ice rink using hockey sticks.
Maybe it's because I used to go to Six Flags a lot during this time, but this felt very much like a scene that you would see, like a show that they would do at like Six Flags. Well,
there's Batman on ice. Right. You would have had. I will say this, though. If you didn't pick up on the type of movie this was from that scene, I mean, all that scene is missing are the bam, pow,
wham
popping up on the screen while they're fighting. That's all it was.
Yeah.
So, also, Mr. Freeze and his Freeze-mobile, if you want to call it that, he actually had one of those in the comics.
His ice truck.
Yep. In Detective Comics 373 in 1968, we have Mr. Freeze driving around in a Freeze-mobile, although it just looks like a standard car. It's not this tank-looking thing that Arnold Schwarzenegger rides around in.
Chill wagon.
It is also in that issue that Aunt Harriet, for those of you who don't know who Aunt Harriet is, in the comics, Aunt Harriet is Dick Grayson's actual aunt. She develops an illness that can only be cured through cryosurgery.
Huh.
Yeah.
Is that a real thing?
I have no idea.
We'll ask Dr. Freeze.
But in it, the surgeon comes out and lets them know that the special tool that they use had broken, and so they were not going to be able to do the surgery. And of course, Batman ends up getting Mr. Freeze's freeze gun, and that's what they use to save Aunt Harriet at the end of the issue. So you still have that tie in there, just like needing Mr. Freeze to help cure Alfred in the movie.
Chills on wheels.
Okay. Keeping with those puns. And the only other thing I found with Mr. Freeze is in Batman 375 in September of 1984, Mr. Freeze does try to freeze Gotham with a giant freeze cannon. So like he tries to do with the satellite here and turn it into a giant freeze cannon, he tried to do that in 1984.
I feel like that satellite thing was like peak 90s of like not actually understanding what technology is and what it does.
Oh yeah, you mean like a telescope, which is essentially what that was.
It was a telescope using satellites to get the heat from the other side of the world to warm up.
Yeah.
That's not
how science works. Yeah, that's not how a telescope works.
It's also not how passwords work.
I also love how it's being controlled by this giant thing of these huge diamonds.
Right.
And if there's this many diamonds just available and sitting, why was the diamond at the beginning such a big deal?
Yeah.
Anyway.
This should have been Dr. Freeze's first stop. That's why he's Dr. Freeze during the day, but when he's Mr. Freeze, he's a little crazy. He's not a big of a planner.
No. Some of the gadgets you see actually came from the comics, even though most people think of the grappling hook from the little gun that Batman will hold and shoot out. The ones that shoot out from their wrist, he has used that in the comics before. The little miniature laser that all three of them use at some point has been in the comics before. Of course, Bat Bomb is something you see a lot in the comics. So just all of that.
Bat on the front of anything.
Yeah, which I'm going to get into when I get in my final decision. But
Bat card.
Yeah. So I also found out that Julie Madison, who, if you aren't paying enough attention, you don't realize is the name of Claudia Schiffer's character. And Bruce Wayne's girlfriend in the movie.
Just the most pointless, like...
Yeah, well, that's kind of the way that character's been in all of these Batman movies. I mean, you had Vicky Vale in the first one. That was probably the only one that really mattered. And then after that, it was there's somebody there, or they did the crazy thing with Nicole Kidman in Batman Forever. But anyway, Julie Madison is from the comics. She was in Detective Comics 31 in September of 1939.
Wow.
So not long after Batman's premiere, we are introduced to Julie Madison, who in the comic is actually Bruce's fiance.
Huh.
Yeah.
Why?
It goes nowhere.
As do most of his relationships.
But I will say I thought that was so funny to have George Clooney in that role.
Playing George Clooney.
Yeah, who's just avoiding marriage at all cost.
Yeah, although he's been happily married for several years now.
But the George Clooney at that time
and for several years afterwards, was very much like and it was almost comical. Like when the reporter asked him, like, "Oh, when are you two gonna tie the knot?" And, marriage. Yeah, and I'm just like, okay, come on.
I also found some connections with Poison Ivy. So in Batman 339 in September of 1981, Ivy disguises herself in order to approach Bruce Wayne. And she does so in the back of a car driven by her lackey, although her lackey is
not
a guy named, it's a guy named Evan, who then later gets the name Ivor with no explanation as to why he has a name change, but he's clearly the same guy. Not in that one issue. It's like in a later issue, he all of a sudden is called Ivor. But yeah, so we have that moment, very similar. And I'm pointing all this out to really show that Schumacher, and I didn't write down who wrote the screenplay, but they clearly did.
They did their research, and they clearly loved their version of Batman.
Yeah. And also in Batman 344, so just a few issues later, in February of 1982, Evan, Ivor, whatever, he is transformed into a giant half-plant, half-human monster. So that might have been where the inspiration for this version of Bane came from. Maybe.
Right.
That's all I can think of. And then in Legends of the Dark Knight, number 43 in February of 1993, so just a few years before the movie came out, that actually ends with Ivy in prison playing the He Loves Me Not from her cell.
Which doesn't make any sense. Like, why would Poison Ivy be ripping apart a flower?
Well, let's also remember that she completely destroys and burns down her lab at the beginning, which
with
is...
all the plants. And
so
maybe she's not as, earth-friendly as we like to think she is.
Or she doesn't have as much control as is shown by the fact that the little Venus flytrap type flower
eats her.
Although she was inside of it and it opened up at the beginning of that scene.
And that was fine.
But
her legs weren't in it, I guess.
But she
I don't know.
falls into it that says curses and then it closes down on her.
Okay. So I love Poison Ivy in this movie, and I will not apologize for it. It's so much fun to just watch her. Like, if I could just watch just her parts, it's so, it's
I'm sure
so
somebody's done a cut on YouTube.
It's so over the top, stupid, silly that I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting performance. It's just funny for me to watch her in this.
After seeing her in Kill Bill.
Yeah, that later she would be in Kill Bill and be a completely different type of character.
Right, which just really does show her range. And that's why I believe that she read this. She knew the type of movie they were looking for, and that's what she performed. Yeah.
The only other comic book connection I could find with this piece of garbage was Batman Digital Justice in February of 1990. So that is a one-shot, or I guess, it's a one-shot. It's not an Elseworld. They have not connected to Elseworld. It takes place in the future. And in this, Gordon's grandson, who is also named James Gordon, but his grandson actually discovers the Batcave. So the same way Barbara discovers the Batcave in this one. He discovers the Batcave, and an AI version of Batman.
Oh, instead of Alfred?
Yeah, comes onto the computer and says that he knew this day would come. And so there is a costume and equipment prepared for who would be the new Batman. That's James Gordon becomes Batman in this story. So again, possibly the connection there to do the same thing with Barbara going into the Batcave, Alfred's AI being there and saying that he knew she would do it, which I find is so funny of him saying, I've gone ahead and taken your measurements. First off, how do you know her measurements so well? But because makes her a costume.
That kind of rubber is not forgiving. You got to be exact with that kind of stuff.
Makes her a costume, and he seems to be, with his AI version, seems to be like he's okay with all of this. Yet he was, you will not show her how to ride a motorcycle at the beginning of the movie. And I don't know.
Well, I don't know. The lady doth protest too much. You know how it be that way sometimes.
Oh, it's not the lady in this one. It's the 30-year-old ward.
The 30-year-old
who doth protest too much.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into our final decision. Bag it, stack it, or trade it. I'm going to let Bethany, you go ahead and maybe shock a bunch of people.
Okay. So I will say that as I have aged, so has this movie. And I don't hold the fondness for it in my heart like I did years ago, 20 plus years ago at this point. However, I don't think it's as terrible of a movie. I think if you try to compare it to other comic book movies, other Batman movies, it's terrible. But if you just look at it for what it is, just a campy little romp that's about 30 minutes too long, there are some real gems hidden deep within this movie. For that reason alone, I'm gonna stack it.
Okay. I kind of expected to stack it. I'm still going with trade it.
Yeah.
You know what? I will give this the compliment sandwich. We'll start off with the fact that I actually think that it has aged better.
Yeah.
I do think it is not as bad as it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, but I think that's partly because with a lot of the things coming out of the MCU, a lot of things that came out of DC, especially DC, where people are complaining about it got too dark.
This is not
This
that.
is not. This embraced the colorfulness of the comics, which we praised in movies like Dick Tracy that was at the beginning of the decade of the 90s. You know, and then a lot of people complained about how comic book-ish this movie was, but yeah, that's something we
miss in movies,
and we want more is for the comic book movies to look more like the comic books. So again, I think it does.
It has good in it.
Yeah. So again, I'll start with that, but it's just too ridiculous. Schumacher did say that Warner Brothers cared more about selling toys than making a good movie, and that's obvious, but there's too much going on. You've got 3 villains, you've got the Batgirl coming in, you've got Alfred getting sick, you've got the conflict between Batman and Robin. There's too much going on. If they had focused on maybe half of those stories, probably could have gotten a better movie out of this. Again, Robin is extremely whiny.
Yeah.
You're not going to get any more of that. And then, just like the 60s Batman, which I get, that's what Schumacher was saying he was going for, you've got all this convenience. Yeah. You've got, we didn't know that we were going into this this ice-themed villain until we were on our way there, and Gordon told us, but yet you still happen to have ice skates built into your boots.
They're Boy Scouts. They're always prepared.
Yeah, we happen to have the lasers to heat things up. We have the bat bomb. We have the bat credit card. You know, everything is just so convenient. We have the exact tool we need for the exact moment, which is so the Batman of the 60s, the Adam West Batman. But again, it's corny. It is very corny, but I will end it with another compliment. I don't think George Clooney deserves all the hate that he gets for playing Batman. I think he falters from the movie he is in, but I think he's a great Bruce Wayne. I think his only fault with Batman is the script he had, the words he had to say, and the movie he was in. But I will say George Clooney deserves a little bit more credit. He's still the probably lesser Batman if you rank all of the performers.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's as bad as people give him credit for. I know he has said he's apologized for it, and he's said it's one of the low points of his career. But again,
I hate when people apologize for their stuff.
Yeah, I would say Bruce Willis says
it.
the same thing about Hudson Hawk, and that's one of my favorite. It's a fun, campy movie as well. So I think the same thing.
I would also like to point out that this movie passes the Bechdel test. When Ivy and Batgirl are fighting each other, and they basically just like talk towards each other. They're like not really having a conversation, but they do talk to each other about not a man for 2 lines of dialogue.
Well, there you go. There's another plus. Comes out of Batman and Robin. You get them where you can. All right, but we're going to go ahead and wrap things up here. Thank you, Bethany, for joining me, and happy birthday.
Thank you. My gift is this gift for everyone.
It's Batman and Robin.
It's Batman and Robin. Yeah. You're welcome. Merry Christmas, everybody.
It's amazing. We did Batman and Robin before. We've done Batman Returns. So
you're welcome.
Yeah.
Happy
I do actually think that other than Batman Returns, I think Batman Returns is going to be the last Batman movie we've covered on this show. We've covered all the rest of them because we did the trilogy all together. We've done Batman 89. We've done Batman Forever. We even did The Batman with Robert Pattinson.
Yeah.
We've done Superman, Batman v Superman. We've done Justice League. So, and yeah.
I'm not greedy. If Blake wants to do this movie as well, y'all can do another episode on it. I'm not going to get mad.
I have a feeling Blake's going to be good that you covered it.
I don't know. Like, if he has things to add, I would love to hear y'all's take on it.
Well, we shall see. But we're going to end things there. Rate and review the show. And we're just going to wrap it up. we don't need this to be the 2 hours that that the actual movie is. So we'll end things here. For today, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.